Hello. We have received a lot of requests after the eID vote in Switzerland by the Swiss citizens and they voted against the initiative on what that means in terms of companies like WISeKey as an identity providers and what our views are in what the perfect system, or at least the adequate system, could happen. I personally believe the question addressed to the Swiss citizens was the wrong one, whether this should be a private sector versus a government sector initiative. The right question will be whether the Swiss people or anyone living in Switzerland sees the benefit of having a digital identity. In WISeKey structures and technology, digital identity is not a nationality, it's not a bank account relation, it's not your frequent flyer program. A digital identity, it's your identity as a human on the digital world. So it is your digital twin, it's who you are on the digital world, and who you are on the digital world cannot be issued by a government, a bank, or any third party. It has to be associated with the person itself. So you need to use technologies like public infrastructure, like a strong authentication, like X509 certificates from ITU associated with blockchain as a way to guarantee that that identity that is your identity is not going to be outside your control. The current situation is that when governments wants to issue a digital identity to their citizens, they always associate that with a government type of identity, meaning issued by the government. And that creates confusion. If I have a Swiss digital identity, what about if I have another nationality? And what about if I am a migrant into the country? Will I not be then authorized to have a digital identity? So WISeKey actually ran just a few days ago a webinar with the United Nations Commission for Human Rights, on where we discuss about a digital identity should be a human right. It is the right to exist digitally. And that right should be associated with me. So it is not my nationality, my bank, my frequent flyer program. A digital identity is my birth certificate into the internet. The day I decide to enter the internet, the day I decide to benefit from the internet, I will issue my digital identity based on my analog identity, because it has to be the same one. And that digital identity from that day will follow me in all sorts of transactions I will have to do to the internet. Transactions in my country, transactions outside my country, while I am traveling as a tourist, while I am doing my education courses, where I will establish my credentials with third parties, financial institutions, and other, I will always use my identity. My identity, digital identity, will be based on my consent. So that means that if anybody wants to know anything about me associated with my identity, for instance, my behavior or my qualifications or my data, that consent will be provided only by me and not by the platform. So that reverses a bit the model of social media platforms, where their consent is their consent to disclose your identity and disclose your data. In that model, the model of WISeKey, that consent is associated to the person. We always use the analogy of what we do in the analog world. For instance, when we enter into our house, we have a key. This is our key, and we enter into our house, and that key is only us and our kids and the people we trust with that key. When we invite somebody to our house for a dinner or a visit, we provide a consent to come in to visit us and therefore enter into our house. But that consent is only for entering into our house once and a certain time, an hour. It's not unlimited consent. And that consent can be revoked immediately if for any reason we don't want that person to enter anymore in our house. We need to develop the equivalent in the digital world. The consent, it is our privilege as a humans to be in control of our data, to be in control of everything we leave on the internet. All these pieces of information, this is collected everywhere, in websites, in blogs, in social media. All that information should be associated to my identity, to our identity, and that identity should be the one as a key that will open the door to the data. That model is now the model that exists on the internet currently. And the reason why is because there's a very powerful industry, more than $12 trillion industry now, which makes money by just reselling the services associated with identities than they are created without the user consent. So these social media platforms, they make a lot of money by just creating an identity of the user with the data we provide to them, which we believe is because it's a free service, therefore why not should we provide that data? But that data is just feeding an algorithm, which is our identity inside their platform. And that algorithm gets very powerful as it gets very rich in data. And that data is being commercialized and is being provided to third parties against benefits. Basically, they get money for the data they provide to advertisers, to people that they are data mining or data. So why don't they use dual factor authentication? Why don't they use my digital identity, which is on my control, to single sign on in their website? Very simple reason, because if they do that, they lose their money, they lose their revenue. So with new technologies like the one WISeKey provides, which is based on cryptographic root key capabilities, so that means we have a private key that uses many public keys, and those keys are then provided through identities, digital certificates, which is your identity as a user, and from there on, WISeKey doesn't have any further ownership of that identity. The identity belongs to the user and not to the company. That identity then is stored into your smart card, into your mobile phone, or even into your safe if you don't want to use it because you don't want to use the internet, and therefore you don't need to have a digital identity active, but you still need to have a digital identity in your control so nobody can usurpate that identity and create a fake one on your name with your PII, private identifiable information. So the information that we provide in that identity, we also delegated and distribute in ledgers. So international blockchain ledgers will have a list of all the identities being issued on the WISeKey PKI infrastructure, and those identities on the ledger will prove anybody that you are the person you say you are, because that identity has been established. So the recommendation for Switzerland as we're going to vote in the future is that Swiss need to have a digital identity. It is essential. We need to enter into fourth industrial revolution. Digital identities has been proved to be very, very efficient in the way we process vaccination process, because the digital identity is associated with my vaccination certificate, or the way we associate it with health records, or the way we associate it with government transactions like e-voting, like paying our taxes online. So digital identities are required. But digital identities are not nationality. Therefore, the digital identity should be associated with an attribute, which is my nationality. And we can have many attributes associated with my identity. We can have my nationality, my courses, my diplomas, my health records, all of them under my control, under my key. I have the key of my data, and I have the key of my identity and not anybody else. Or I can delegate that key to people under my consent. The model then will be that private sector should develop the technology. I mean, government doesn't have the technology. This technology, it's a sophisticated technology. There are not many countries that have that technology. Switzerland has the benefit of having companies like WISeKey and others. Then they have PKI capabilities. WISeKey has also, through the OIST Foundation, ownership of its own cryptographic root key, which is now embedded in 6 billion browsers. So that cryptographic root key makes the identity certificate recognized in all the devices, mobile phones, computers, and so on. So we have the technology. That technology should be provided to the government. And again, we can open that as open source, so the government has access to the technology and can, with that technology, develop an attribute based on the PII of the person, digital identifiable information of that person. And that information is then under the control of the citizen. So the government has no further control on that information, because that information should not be disclosed without the consent of the person. So we have the solutions, we have the experience, we have the ecosystem in place. Millions of people have been using this technology. We can do it in Switzerland as we do in many other countries around the world. We just need to have clarity on what this technology does and what this technology does not do, and with strong technical capabilities and a steering committee supervising the technology and at the same time supervising the implementation, we can develop this further. WISeKey was one of the pioneers in the e-voting project in Geneva 20 years ago. We actually conducted many elections using technology similar to the one I am describing. So we can do a project for the Swiss citizens, provided that that technology is open. It is based on PKI, uses cryptographic root keys, which are stored in the country, where the data stays in the country under the user consent and the verification of the identity. It is available through blockchain layers. Thank you very much for your attention.